How's everybody doing? So, where are we at this week? Yeah, starting a new chapter. Curveball. Alright. So, we went through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Just finished 1st and 2nd Timothy last week. So, we're just going to keep on going and start at Titus 1 today. Titus is another short book. It's only got like 3-4 chapters in it. So, kind of be thinking about where you want to go, what you want to do next after this, if you just want to keep going straight, or if you got a book you've been wanting to learn about, or anything like that, we'll go ahead and knock it out next time. So, Titus 1. When you think about Paul writing the letters to Timothy and Titus, sometimes he says the same thing to different ones because they're going to different places. So they're not 100% identical, but for the most part, they're different. And it's funny because Paul, knowing that they're different, kind of talks to them differently, like writes them a little bit different. So he wrote this letter to Titus. It's not Titus writing it, it's Paul again writing to Titus. And as Paul does, he starts it out with a big, nice introduction. So Paul, a servant of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ, according to the faith of God's elect, and the acknowledging of the truth which is after godliness, in hope of eternal life which God that cannot lie promised before the world began. We just write like, hello, and then start and pause, boom, Jesus Christ, God's elect. But hath in due times manifest his word through preaching, which is committed unto me according to the commandment of God our Savior. And so it says preaching here. But hath in due times manifested his word through preaching. So what do we think of when we think of preaching today?
Telling the gospel.
Somebody getting up here, on stage in church and preaching to people. It's telling them the gospel, telling them the word. Tell them kind of how it compares to today's times in the world and things that they've thought of in a Christ-like manner this week. But back then, it's a little bit different. You could do exactly the same thing, but it was new. Preaching was kind of a new thing that's a little bit different from what you would think of it as. But it comes from the word kerugma, and it's just a proclamation of the gospel. So, that which is promulgated by a herald or public crier. So, a herald. Anybody know what a herald is? Hark the angels and all that? Okay. This is a herald back then. Because paper was expensive, ink was expensive, you didn't have newspapers yet. So you'd have a herald who would read a paper and go out on the street corners and just yell at everybody. It's kind of how people knew what was going on. So they would, blow the little trumpet like, oh man, the herald's here, he's about to say something crazy. And then they would just come and tell you what you should be afraid of that week or whatever, if you compare it to today's time. So, and that's why when you see newspapers, I would say a good 50% of them that exist have Herald in the name. Herald News from Boston, Yale, Miami, Herald Sun, therefore Victoria, but she's not here to see that. I'll put it in just for her. Alright, I'll have to get her next time. So that's what a herald was, and they did. So the only difference between a herald and preaching, they do the same thing as a herald does, but now it's the gospel. Now they're on the corners acting like madmen. But that's okay they act like madmen, because Paul was like, oh, I'm the crazy one, right? Because I'm screaming the madness of Christ. He had a pretty good little thing about that, and people were calling him crazy. So, preaching, these are some pretty old depictions of it, probably 1800s. It went way before that, but it's a little bit different. You see, a lot of people like the preachers that, wow, very energetic, walk on pews and stuff. Here's a picture from the 1700s of a dude on a chair on a table in a place. So they've been doing that for a while. It's an old preacher trick. Sometimes they wouldn't actually be in a building. They would just go stand on some hay, like my man's doing down here at the bottom. Just anywhere to be heard. So you got to think of how different it would be. Preaching now, you preach mostly in a church. People come to you to hear it. Preaching then, you went out where there was a lot of people, stood on something tall, and just started yelling at everybody, whether they wanted to hear it or not. And that's how he kind of converted back then. So you had to be pretty brave back then to do all that. So now, people who wants to hear me comes to you. Back then, you had to go to people if there was just people there, whether they wanted to hear you or not. So it came a long way. Preaching's evolved a lot, but now we're getting a little bit on the other spectrum of things where preaching can just be, I get up here, I give you a motivational speech, and then throw God's name in it 1 or 2 times, and then you throw me a bunch of money, and I fly around the country. So let's not get into that part. So to Titus, mine own son after the common faith, grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ our Savior. So it was not his actual son by birth or by blood, but he said, my own son after the common faith. So him and Timothy were a little bit different, Titus and Timothy. There's not exactly a whole lot on Titus, not as much as there was Timothy, but he was around. He was around Paul a lot. Paul mentions him in quite a few books. So who was Titus? Unlike Timothy, he was a Greek. So he didn't grow up hearing the gospel or the Old Testament, stuff like that, being read or learning about God. He was from Greece. So when he met Paul, he just listened to Paul and was like, hey, I like what you're saying. And he was a newly convert, fresh into Christianity, we'll say. And he was an apostolic delegate of Paul. I looked for a while, what would you call Timothy and Titus and all those guys that Paul recruited? Are they his apostles, his disciples? And someone said an apostolic delegate. And I was like, ooh, that's a good word. Apostolic delegate. So he was the bearer of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. So when Paul wrote 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Titus, they believe, was the one to deliver it to Corinth and take it to them. And he was a bit more independent than Timothy was, a bit more self-reliant. He didn't really need a whole bunch of instruction like Timothy needed or wanted. He would more often than not just go out and do his own thing. And Paul's like, well, I trust him. He knows what he's doing, I guess. And he's mentioned in Titus, 2 Timothy, Galatians, and 2 Corinthians. So to back that up a little bit, 2 Corinthians, Paul came into Corinth, or a city, and he said, I had no rest in my spirit because I found not Titus my brother. But taking my leave of them, I went from thence into Macedonia. So Paul went into this city looking for Titus. Titus is supposed to be there. He's not there. He's like, man, I hope nothing bad happened to him. You know, he's worried, he couldn't sleep. But he wasn't there, so he kept on going and went to Macedonia. But later on in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, it said, nevertheless, God that comforteth those that are cast down, comforted us by the coming of Titus. So Titus showed up a little bit later in Macedonia. Therefore we were comforted in your comfort, yea, and exceedingly the more joyed we for the joy of Titus, because his spirit was refreshed by you all. So the reason they didn't find Titus is because he came, set up a church in that city, preached the gospel to him, and he just went to another city. Didn't really hang around to wait on Paul. He's like, I could wait, but there's just another city right down the road. I'm going to go hit them up right quick. So he kind of took initiative to go himself. Paul got there. He's like, where are you at? He comes back. He's like, yeah, I was actually over here. I set up another church, so we're going to have to start counting them into the fold. That would be pretty cool if you teach somebody to hunt. You're giving them hunting lessons. And one day he doesn't show up to hunting lessons. You're like, dang, where's he at? And then a little bit later, he comes back. Technical difficulties. A little bit later, he comes back with a deer. You're like, we were supposed to be learning how to hunt, but I guess you got a deer, so never mind. I guess you know what you're doing. You're good to go. That's kind of the things that Titus started doing to everybody. All right. So, yeah, took a little bit more of his own initiative, a little bit out from Timothy. So for this cause left I thee in Crete. He's trustworthy enough to just be left on his own in a lot of places. That thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I appointed thee. If any be blameless, and here we go again. So he's giving him instructions on, I need you to go to all these places. I need you to set up the church, but here's how you set up the elders. Here's how you set up the bishops. So similar to what we went through in Timothy, saying in Titus. So, if any be blameless, husband of one wife, as we talked about before, having faithful children, not accused of riot or unruly. Everybody's being pretty quiet and good right now. So, for a bishop must be blameless, as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine, no striker, not given to filthy lucre, but a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate. Holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, and he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. So this list, significantly shorter than the one that was given to Timothy. And Timothy is like, a bishop must be, I think it was a whole lot of different stuff that they gave the criteria. But with Titus, he could trust him a little more. He's like, I think you get what a bishop's supposed to be. I think you're understanding that. I don't know 100% if he did trust Titus more. It just, he gave him a little bit less instruction probably because he was taking his own initiative and going and doing his own thing a lot. He was more of a self-reliant kind of guy. Tell him to do something, he's going to do it. You can have faith in that. So, blameless. What does it mean to be blameless? If something bad's going on in the world, nobody can turn to you and say, you did it. You know, if people in your church are going out and drinking, and then they look at you and they're like, well, you do it too. You are now blamed. You're now at blame for that because you're not an example that they can point at. If your church goes out and let's say, protests veterans' funerals and holds up very, very mean, provocative signs. And they get in trouble with God for that. I'm talking about like Westboro Baptist type, not just, protesting. That's going to kind of come on the pastors a little bit later on. They're going to be like, that was your fault. You did it. So, as church members, we have a big responsibility to everybody outside looking at us to be the example so that we aren't found blameless. As teachers and preachers, we got it a whole lot worse and stuff like that. Like if you tell the kids something wrong, Gary, and they go out like, well, Gary said, like, just even if you just stumble on your words a little bit, now you're at a lot larger of a blame than just someone who was sitting in the pews that day. If I get up here and teach something ridiculous, and you go out and start, writing for a wrong cause or just doing something because you think you're okay, now I'm in a lot of trouble, not just with you, not just with the church, but with God. So we got to keep our T's crossed and our I's dotted here. But to be blameless. A steward of God. So what's a steward? Somebody who kind of takes care of stuff, takes care of business. Back in the day, and we'll go back biblical days, some people had a whole lot of money. Not very many, but the ones who had a lot of money had a whole lot. So they would set up like the parable of the vineyard. Like, I'm going to own a vineyard in this city, but I have a property in this city, this city, this city, and I can't just call them and see what's up. I got to be moving a whole lot. So they would appoint a steward. Like, look, you know what I want to happen here. You know how to do it. Here's money. So it basically became their house and their home until the guy came back. And then it was his house and home. So looking in the churches to be a steward of God, this is God's home. Not just the churches, but the world. We're supposed to be the ones who's taking care of it and keeping everything in order and in line. That way when God comes back, but then it's his home. So we're just left to be in responsibility of that. So a biblical worldview of stewardship can be consciously defined as utilizing and managing all resources God provides for the glory of God and the betterment of his creation. Use what we have to glorify God, because he's the one who gave it to us anyway. Not self-willed. So I know I just talked about Titus, he's like, hey, I'm going to go into this city, even though nobody told me about it, or no one told me to. But self-willed is more so like, I know what God wants me to do. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I don't want to do it. I want to do this. So you go and do that. You kind of become more defiant and leaning on your own understanding. So this doesn't mean like self-betterment or having a strong will for yourself to do good. This is more talking about who cares what the Bible says, who cares what God says. I'm just going to do my own thing anyway. Because what I know is better than what God and the preachers can tell me. I trust myself more. That's what self-willed is. So for example, back when God was leading them out of Egypt and led them through the wilderness, and then one day they're just like, you know what? I don't care about God anymore. Let's build a golden calf and start worshiping it. Why? I have no idea. Why I thought that was a good idea. So a lot of people that are out there right now, they don't know if God exists or not. So a lot of people are having questions. God has talked to these people, split rivers in front of them, done all that, and they're still like, I like this calf better. Like I don't understand. I had no excuse to get through that. But, I don't know. So, this guy, James Baldwin, he had a pretty good quote about it. People who believe that they are strong-willed and are masters of their own destiny can only continue to believe this by becoming specialists in self-deception. So if you believe that what you know is best and what you know is right, you better get really good at tricking yourself, because that's the only way you're going to be able to follow that path. Not soon angry. How many of you guys have a bad temper? How many of you guys ever jumped off? Everybody looked at you when I said that. Everybody. So, I don't really have a bad temper. It's not me doing this. It's not Sean either. It's just our electronics. But I don't really have a bad temper, we'll say. The last time I lost my temper, I was late for class one day at school, and my battery wouldn't start my car. I was like, of course, I'm late, running late, and now I get in my car and my battery's not starting. Your stereotypical bad start to a bad day. So I get out, and I'm like tapping my starter, doing everything. I just put a brand new battery in it, so I knew it wasn't that. I'm twisting it, and it's just clicking. And I just get mad, and I start punching my battery as hard as I can. Broke it all to pieces. Battery acid everywhere. My knuckles are bleeding to death. And then I caught myself, and I was like, well, now there's no way I'm getting this car started because the battery's in pieces. So I was like, yeah, I lost my temper, I lost my cool. I always catch myself, and I think it's so funny. I'm like, dude, you know, every time you do this, you break something. And it's like, you don't have it, you gotta buy a new one. So I took it to Walmart, and I was like, dude, I don't know, it must have been cold or something. This battery's cracked all to pieces. I just bought it. He was like, well, it's under warranty here, and just gave me a new one. So it worked out in the end, but it was a bad situation. But if somebody comes in here and they're being a little difficult, or with the kids and all of that, and then you just get angry and you pick them up, throw something, start slinging things, throwing books, knocking things over, you kind of lose your cool a little bit. It doesn't look good on you. It doesn't look good on the church. Because they're like, look, this guy must have a lot of pent-up anger, pent-up problems to just snap like this. So that's why I'm saying it's important to not soon angry, kind of be slow to get tempered. So this is a good one too. It is only our bad temper that we put down to being tired, worried, or hungry, but we put our good temper to ourselves. So think about it. Every time you get mad, sorry, I just haven't ate today. You get mad, it's like, well, I'm just worried, I'm just stressed out. But every time you keep your cool, or you're calm in a situation like right now, we say, oh, it's just ourselves. Like, oh, I'm just a not very tempered person. So that was good. So for a bishop must be not given to wine. I'm sure some of you guys have been there before. But given to wine is not a good thing. Never really ends up well. Unless this is what you want to look forward to, everybody, given to wine. No? Nobody wants to be given wine? Good, neither are bishops. They're not supposed to be either. So it's because when you're in this state, try talking about Jesus to somebody and see if they take you seriously. They're not going to. And they never will. So same thing for here. You can be like, do you believe in Jesus? No. Do you believe in him now? Okay, I guess a little bit. You didn't really convert him. They just said that so you'd stop hitting him. And if you're the type of person who gets mad and just hits people out of nowhere, no one's really going to want to be around you. Like, I've had a lot of friends that would just fight at the drop of a hat, and I would have to just go around being a peacekeeper with them all the time to keep us out of trouble, keep him out of trouble, keep us from getting kicked out of every place we like to go to. So, no striker, and not given to filthy lucre. Filthy lucre, again, is just money obtained corruptibly. You do something bad to get the money. Not going out and working and getting it, but you stole it would be filthy lucre. You tricked people into giving you money is filthy lucre, as you see in a lot of the bigger churches today. Because it's not hard to get a lot of money. You just have to sell little pieces of your soul to get it every time. So, if you ever don't have a whole lot of money and you're wondering why or worried about it, it's probably because you have a lot more soul that you didn't want to give up and trade for it. So, speaking of filthy lucre, stocks, Wall Street stuff. It's not this mic.
It's not the mic.
Oh. Sorry, technical difficulties. But, how do I explain this?
Put it on your head,
The stock market. How many of you guys play stocks, do the stock market? Good. We're off to a good start. So stock markets are set up to take timeouts. Timeout. All right. Trying to fix some sound popping. That does sound better. Okay. So none of you play stocks. That's cool. But the stock market's set up in different layers. The more you learn about the stock market, the less you want to play it anyway. So if you invest like $1,000 or something in some stocks, people expect it like, oh, I made a really good investment here, so I'm going to double my money. It's going to turn into $2,000 when this stock rises. Well, what they do, they have it set up so people like that, when you invest $1,000, it's going to tank. It's going to move. And then when a certain amount gets withdrawn from that, then it gets bought up by the people who know what's happening 3 steps ahead of it, and it gets raised anyway. It's a surface skim. They just skim all the loose money off the surface, make everybody broke, so the people investing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars get more and more and more to keep people at the bottom from getting less and less and less. So there's that bull again, filthy lucre. At some point, America just decided we're just going to be about money. Who cares about America? We're going to sell things to China. We're going to sell things to Mexico. We're going to sell things out to all these other countries and stuff. And while no one in America is really going to benefit from it, me and my 10 friends are going to benefit a lot from it. We're going to make, and that's how you get your billionaires. That's how you get the people with insane amounts of money from that. But of all symbols, they chose a big golden bull to put on Wall Street, similar to the people who did it back in the wilderness. So, those are things a bishop's not supposed to be. A bishop is supposed to be a lover of hospitality. You know, a lot of times these preachers and things back in the day, they didn't have a house, they didn't have anywhere to go. So when they got to a new city, they loved hospitality. People that are just nice and welcoming and bring them in, because they're probably going to be more inclined to hear you. And even if they don't listen to what you have to say, they're not going to fight you much about it. So, a lover of good men, good people to help them. You know, some people, again, might not have listened to them or heard them, but they're doing good. They welcomed them into their home. They helped them out. Maybe gave them a little bit of money for new clothes and stuff like that. But bishops are supposed to be lovers of these good men going out and doing good things. Sober. So, I know it said not giving to wine, but you're not supposed to be giving to anything else either. Don't try to use that as a cop-out. So, when it's saying sober, it also means not necessarily under the influence of drugs, but you're not under the influence of anything from the outside. So there's a big war going on in this city. I don't care about it. I'm focused on getting this city converted to God. Like, oh, but aren't you scared they're going to come in and take it? If they come in, that's fine, man. We'll worry about it when they get here. Staying sober-minded. It's not putting worry on things you can't control anyway. Vigilant. So a bishop must be just. You can't walk in and be like, well, I like my friends over here, so you're all going to be assistant bishops now. You guys give them the money, you know, and stuff like that. You don't play favorites. You got to be just. Sometimes in a position, like even a teacher, people ask you questions. They'll be like, well, what do you think I should do about this? Just my friends, family, outside, and expecting a godly answer. So sometimes you want to be like, just don't worry about it. Don't do anything. But sometimes you're like, man, you need to do something about it, though, but I wish I wasn't the one giving you the advice on it. But you have to be just. You have to weigh this out. You have to go, well, here's what the Bible says about it. I can't go against that. I can't go against the Bible. So read that. Take into account what you think that would apply to this situation. Tell them a little bit about how it helps. But ultimately, you don't want to just be like, play favorites, tell people one thing, do something else. You have to be just in your actions. And holy. Everybody remembers what holiness is, right? Did a whole Thursday on it. So, righteous is the act that makes you holy. So if you do things righteous, this means making the right decisions, not making the wrong ones, doing the godly decisions. You'll hit a point to where you become holy from acting righteous. Not many people act holy, as holy is what you become from the act itself. So a bishop must be holy. He must be doing a whole lot of righteous acts to get the status of holy biblically. He is sanctified by righteousness unto holiness. It's the best way to explain it. So temperate. What does temper mean? Doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as slow to anger. Temperate just much means tried, weighed. So when you see here temperate, you immediately think somebody having a bad temper. But that's not entirely the case. It's just someone, you might like doing something, but you know how to control that. You know how to deny that to yourself. Like, man, I love peanut-covered or chocolate-covered M&Ms, the peanut M&Ms. But I'm not going to eat 3 bags because I know that's kind of bad for me. I'm not going to just sit down and eat 3 bags of it. You have to temper yourself. So people think temperate like that, but when I hear temper, I think stuff like this. Like steel that we work with. So if you make just a raw steel, cut it into the shape, and put it in the machine, it's probably going to break. It's just how steel works. But you temper it. So think about a samurai sword. They heat it up. They beat it. They heat it up again. They beat the steel. And every time you do that, it's getting harder and harder until you get it to a certain hardness that you want. Tried by fire, and then it's measured. And now you have a sword, the steel sharp enough and hard enough. It won't break when you just hit stuff. It won't just shatter at the first sign of anything pulling against it. So that's what I think of when I hear temperate. And also, temperate. You can think, so when you're making moonshine, you have to temper it because it's undrinkable when it first comes out. You put a little water in it and now it becomes drinkable. So not only do you temper it to make yourself harder, you need to be tempered to make yourself consumable to other people. If I just go out preaching the gospel super hard and mean and punching and doing all that, people are going to think it's crazy. People are going to think they don't want any part of it. But you can't be so weak that you're just not giving anybody anything, not giving them a reason to do that. Tempered. Tempered and tempered. Hard and softer. So, holding fast the faithful word, as he hath been taught, that he may be able to, by sound doctrine, both to exhort, to convince the gainsayers. Not extort the gainsayers. So, basically this means by sound doctrine, both to call near and to convict, or to call for and to reprove, or to call for and to tell a fault. Tell everybody that you're living the wrong way, you need to be living for God. Because these people, most of the time, have never even heard of God, and they're like, well, how am I living the wrong way? And you would have to prove that to them. Like, well, look, your God says to sacrifice humans. Probably shouldn't be doing that. Do you want to be sacrificed in all of this? So, and then to the gainsayers. Gainsayers are just anybody that's going to contradict you. People that are like, well, what about this? Well, what about that? These are the gainsayers. So you have to be skilled enough in your doctrine to be able to call them out, exhort them, or reprove them, anybody who's calling back out at you. So, for there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouth must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things that they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, said, the Cretians, always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. So Paul tried a lot. One of his things to do is he would go into the Jewish temples. And they were always the ones that every time he would set up a church, they would come in and tear it back down, or prove everybody wrong, or give out money. They were very concerned about profit more than anything else. They liked their power, they liked their synagogues, they liked their riches. They didn't want anybody to come and take that. Now that the new person's coming in, like, look, same God, but Jesus Christ came and died for that, so you don't have to do the sacrifices. You don't have to give them all their money. They're actually doing wrong having all these temples and stuff. So, and then one of the prophets even called the Cretians liars, evil beasts with slow bellies, and that's kind of what, Cretians is a place, is an island that's out from Greece, and they didn't like that. So this witness is true. So that was a true story. They really did that. So wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. So, Jewish fables, we'll get into a lot of this more next week. It can't be like a 2-hour class up here. But commandments of men that turn from the truth. So, unto the pure, all things are pure. But unto them that are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. So, if you're pure and you believe in Jesus, you can find purity in a lot of people. You can find purity in a lot of things. If you are unpure and unbelieving, nothing is pure. The world is your playground because it's all for naught anyway. So they don't believe in, we'll get into this, I won't spoil it for next week. So they profess that they know God, but in works they deny him, being abominable, not just bad, but abominable, like a snowman, and disobedient, and unto every good work a reprobate. So he would come up, feed the poor, help the people, give them a place to stay. Like, look, all the poor people, you have a church now, you have a place and people together. And then the Jewish, the Pharisees and Sadducees would come in and they would be like, no, this is ours. Get back out into the street and, we'll pray for you and give us the money to make the sacrifices unto things. Probably a bull, for all I know. They love bulls for some reason. But being abominable and disobedient unto every good work, a reprobate. So we'll continue next week more about that, on what they were doing to Titus, as well as they did to Timothy and Paul and everybody else. So, any questions?